Dust danced in the dying sunlight as a lone silhouette edged across the barren plain. Her feet bled no shoes, no provisions, no family left to call her own. In the distance, a silent rancher atop a chestnut mare watched her stumble through the heat. He never spoke a single word yet. Something in his steady gaze offered a lifeline she'd nearly lost hope of finding. This is a tale of desperate survival frontier justice and unexpected tenderness. Prepare to venture into the Wild West, where gun smoke clings to the sky, hearts are forged under the scorching sun, and one silent man's compassion reshapes a lost woman's destiny. Elizabeth Lizzie McNeil was not always a wanderer. She had been a farmer's daughter in the outskirts of Fort Collins, Colorado, until smallpox tore through her family and left her orphaned in the span of a single week. At just 19, she found herself with no mother's lullaby to guide her, no father's strong shoulders to rest upon. The farmhouse, once alive with laughter and the smell of fresh cornbread, stood silent as a mausoleum. With nothing but a threadbare sack containing a change of clothes and a single keepsake, a locket with her mother's portrait, Lizzie set out to find work and perhaps a place that still harbored a glimmer of hope. But the West could be unforgiving. Months stretched on as she roamed dusty roads, sleeping under brittle mesquite trees and grazing on scraps and wild berries where she could find them. Small towns turned her away when she begged for a morsel of bread or a patch of land to rest her head. Some barkeeps were kind, some were cruel, but most, simply, looked past the ragged girl who hunched in the corner too timid to demand a place in the rowdy saloons. Lizzie wore a pair of boots so battered their soles parted with each step. Eventually the leather disintegrated, leaving her barefoot and defenseless against the scorching terrain. When she reached the wide, rolling plains of Wyoming, her toes were already cracked and bleeding. She had lost more weight than she could afford. Torn between desperation and the faintest spark of will, Lizzie pressed on. Little did she know that fate, as harsh as it could be, sometimes had a peculiar way of dropping unexpected kindness at life's most desperate crossroads. The evening sky glowed with a palette of reds and oranges when she first saw him, a lone cowboy mounted on a chestnut horse. He wore a dusty duster coat, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, obscuring much of his face. From a distance, she noted his posture was rigid yet calm, like a statue carved into the twilight. Overcome by fatigue, Lizzie stumbled on the gravel path. Her body gave up before her spirit did. She fainted, the world going dark. She awoke to the sound of horse hooves. She was still on the ground, face in the dirt, but she could sense him there, close enough to touch. His name would later be known to her as John Stedman, a rancher whose voice the wind had seemingly stolen. But that night, she knew only that he was tall, and that he silently offered his hand. His eyes carried a sorrow akin to her own. Though she felt vulnerable hunger overriding caution, she took his hand. He helped her onto his horse without uttering a word. Frightened, she clung to the saddle, uncertain of his intentions, but too weak to protest if they turned out foul. They rode under a canopy of stars, guided by the rancher's quiet certainty. It was a gentle ride. He seemed to sense her fragility and slowed the horse's pace to not jostle her too much. Lizzie drifted in and out of consciousness, lulled by the horse's rhythmic steps. The last coherent thought in her mind was that perhaps she was riding straight to heaven, or maybe to hell. She was past caring. When Lizzie opened her eyes again, she was lying in a bed that smelled faintly of hay and soap. The narrow room was bare, except for a wooden chair and a small bedside table. A solitary oil lamp cast flickering shadows on the walls. She struggled to sit up, her head pounding. At the end of the bed sat the silent man. His hat rested on his knee, revealing greying hair at his temples. He noticed her stirring and offered a tin cup of water. Grateful beyond words, Lizzie drank, until her thirst subsided. Her parched throat ached with every gulp, but the relief was sweeter than anything she could recall in recent memory. When she tried to speak, her voice came out rasping and weak. "Thank you, mister. I don't know how to repay you." He tilted his head in acknowledgement. With slow, careful gestures, he pointed to himself, then mimed a motion across his throat, as though drawing a line. She realized with a start he couldn't speak. Over the next few days, Lizzie learned his name from a letter she found on the kitchen table, addressed to John Stedman, Painted Rock Ranch, Wyoming. It was an old piece of mail from a certain Wyatt Earp, referencing a horse trade gone sour down in Dodge City. She recognized the name Wyatt Earp. Some called him a lawman, some a gunslinger, but no one doubted he was a living legend on the frontier. That letter, along with John's gestures, told her everything she needed to know. John Stedman was a rancher once entangled in dealings with men of fortune and danger, but now he existed in the hush of Painted Rock Ranch, raising horses far from the chaos of the bigger towns. Lizzie spent her first few nights drifting between feverish delirium and trembling gratitude. John quietly changed her water, tended to her blisters, and offered a basin of warm water for her feet. The only sound in the room was the night wind rattling the windows, a sound that seemed to match the loneliness in both their hearts. As strength returned to her body, Lizzie ventured from the small room. Painted Rock Ranch was no grandiose estate, but it was cozy. Beyond the modest wooden farmhouse, a stretch of grazing land dotted with horses rolled out toward the horizon. The corral held 4 Mustangs that John was in the process of breaking and training. Rusty tools hung from the walls of a small barn, and a single blacksmith's forge stood unused beside a stack of firewood, though John was silent. Painted Rock Ranch thrummed with unspoken stories. Lizzie found a ragged old photograph in the barn's loft. It showed a younger John, standing beside a woman with hauntingly beautiful eyes. They had matching wedding bands on their hands. She wondered what had befallen his wife, for the picture was the only female presence she found in the house. She didn't pry, but curiosity pressed its weight on her thoughts. Each day she endeavored to repay John's kindness by doing small chores, sweeping the floors, washing dishes, and feeding the horses hay. John did not stop her, but he never encouraged her with a word or gesture either. He worked tirelessly from dawn until dusk, returning for lunch only when he remembered. Still, he always left a portion of bread or beans on the table for her. One evening, as twilight draped the ranch in purple shadows, Lizzie mustered the courage to ask him about the photograph. Was she your wife? The question hung in the air like a half-drawn breath. John's eyes flickered with the pain of memory. He nodded, drew a shaky breath, then shook his head. It was enough to convey the heartbreak without a single syllable. Lizzie felt a pang of empathy, recalling how quickly life can rob one of everything. Weeks slid by, in a semblance of routine. Lizzie's feet healed enough that she could wear a pair of battered shoes John found in storage. She began to learn the unspoken tasks of ranch life, how to wipe down saddles, how to groom a horse without spooking it, how to refill the trough with fresh water. Each evening, John showed her wordlessly what needed to be done. One day supplies ran low, and John gestured for Lizzie to accompany him to town. The nearest settlement was Pine Bluff, a ramshackle place that boasted a single main street with a general store, a saloon named the Timbered Pony, and a blacksmith forging horseshoes behind a corrugated shack. Pine Bluff was not a cheerful place. Rumors said half its population was wanted somewhere for some crime or another. It was the kind of town where the law rarely lingered. They arrived to the curious stares of townspeople. A silent rancher was unusual enough, but a barefoot girl walking at his side, dusty and clad in a threadbare dress, invited all sorts of speculation. John steered her to the general store, where he communicated their needs with curt gestures and a scribbled note. While he was busy selecting flour and coffee, Lizzie noticed a notice pinned to the store's bulletin board: "Wanted the Copper Blood Gang. Bank robbery. Murder. Contact Marshall E. Jackson for reward." The face on the poster sent a chill through her. The figure was a woman with eyes like flint. Margaret Dillon, rumored to be a vicious gunslinger who led a band of cutthroats across several territories. Lizzie shivered, remembering tales from travelers who claimed that Margaret's gang left a trail of bodies. Outside, an even more unsettling sight awaited. 4 men in dusty coats leaned against the hitching post, smoking cigarettes as they eyed John's horse. One of them spat a wad of tobacco on the ground. "Hear you're still out here, John Stedman," he called. John paid him no mind. Lizzie noticed the man's knuckles tighten around the cigarette, eyes filled with menace. She recognized him as Randall Avery, a troublemaker from around these parts. The tension crackled, but John seemed uninterested in a fight. He calmly loaded the supplies onto his horse and swung Lizzie up behind him. They left Pine Bluff with the men's stares burning into their backs. On the ride back, Lizzie's thoughts spun with questions she dared not ask. Who was John Stedman to these men? What had caused them to regard him with such hostility? Yet the gentle sway of the horse and the vast Wyoming plains lulled her into a sense of cautious security. She remembered how her father used to say, "In the West, you never pry open a man's secrets unless you're ready for bullets." Perhaps John's silence was its own fortress. Over the following weeks, Lizzie noticed a subtle shift in the ranch. Sometimes, while she fed the horses, she glimpsed a faraway look in John's eyes as he gazed toward the horizon. She sensed he was waiting or dreading the arrival of something. Nights were colder than usual, made more so by the intangible chill that settled over Painted Rock Ranch. There were times he slept in the barn with a rifle close at hand, as if expecting trouble at any moment. Lizzie tried to help in any way she could. She improved her cooking skills, scrounging up modest meals from dried beans jerky and the occasional rabbit John hunted. Although her presence was a comfort to him, she could see it in the lessening crease of worry at his brow. His silence remained unbroken. Every now and then she caught him studying her, a quiet gratitude and sorrow mingling in his expression, but the reason remained locked away. One morning, while sorting through a pile of old mail in the farmhouse, Lizzie found another letter addressed to John Stedman, this one newly arrived. She recognized the handwriting, Wyatt Earp. Her heart fluttered. Wyatt was stationed in Dodge City, intermittently known for cleaning up the lawless streets. She'd heard stories in her childhood, half whispers about his legendary standoffs and quick draw. Why was he writing to John? Carefully, she took the letter to John in the barn. He opened it with an unreadable expression and read in silence. When he finished, he sank onto a hay bale, shoulders slumped. Lizzie yearned to know what it said, but she didn't want to intrude. However, John, seeing her curious expression, handed it over. The letter read, "John, I hope this finds you well. Word has it you're still riding the range in Wyoming. I'd hoped you'd returned to the living by now. Doc Holliday once told me you'd never be the same after Helena's passing. If I learned one thing in Tombstone, it's that there's never enough time to set things right before the grave. A man named Randall Avery has been stirring trouble. Rumor says he's after Painted Rock Ranch, claims you owe him a debt. I don't know the details, but be on your guard. He might have bigger fish behind him. Some folks say he's made an alliance with the Copper Blood Gang. If you need a friend, come to Dodge City. Wyatt Earp. Lizzie felt the floor drop from under her. Randall Avery, those men in Pine Bluff. Could they really be in league with Margaret Dillon's Copper Blood Gang? She looked at John in alarm, expecting him to react. He stared off into the distance, fists clenched. Then slowly he rose and took the letter to a wooden box in the loft. He placed it with the others, evidently refusing to let fear drive him from his land. But Lizzie had seen enough to know they were teetering on the brink of grave danger. Late one afternoon, the ranch fell eerily silent. Lizzie was brushing down one of the horses in the corral, and John was in the barn, repairing a broken fence rail. The sun dipped low, painting the sky with strokes of purple and gold. That was when the riders appeared, 3 men in dust-choked coats, guns, strapped low on their hips. The smallest among them wore a battered top hat, giving him an almost comical air, except for the deadly seriousness in his eyes. Lizzie's heart hammered in her chest. She recognized Randall Avery at once, his lips pulled back in an unfriendly grin. "John Stedman," he called in a mocking voice. "I hear you're being stubborn about some debts." John stepped out of the barn. He stood tall, hat brim shading his face. His hand rested casually on the hammer of his revolver, though he made no move to draw. Lizzie glanced at him, anxiety coursing through her. Would he try to speak? But John merely stared at the men. Randall let out a derisive snort. "You don't talk, do you, Fine? Actions always speak louder anyway." He nodded at one of his companions, who pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Here's a legal claim. Says that Painted Rock Ranch belongs to me unless you pay up on that loan you took out. The banknote's overdue by a year, from what I hear." Lizzie caught her breath. A loan. She had never heard John mention anything. The men advanced a step, and John's horse whinnied in distress. Tension coiled tight as a spring in the heavy air. "Tell you what," Randall continued, feigning congeniality. "We don't got to settle this in blood. You hand over the deed, and we let you walk away. Ain't that fair?" The question dripped with deceit. Without warning, Randall drew his pistol and aimed it at John. Time seemed to slow. Lizzie's scream caught in her throat. John made no move to speak or raise his hands in surrender. Instead, his expression hardened. Randall's eyes gleamed with sadistic pleasure as he cocked the hammer. Last chance. The wind whistled, carrying the dryness of dust and unspoken fury. John's stance shifted ever so slightly, his right hand steadying near his holster. Lizzie knew that violence was moments away, and she had no power to stop it. The ranch, her fragile refuge, teetered on the edge of ruin. Before Lizzie could blink, John drew and fired a single shot. The bullet slammed into Randall's weapon, knocking it from his hand in a spray of sparks. Thunder cracked across the ranch. Randall's companions reacted instantly, guns raised, but John was quicker. Another shot, and the man in the top hat crumpled to the ground, clutching a bleeding shoulder. The third man dove behind a water trough, returning fire. Bullets whizzed through the air, one grazing the fence post near Lizzie's head. She flattened herself against the corral boards, heart pounding. Randall, cursing, scrambled for his fallen pistol. John advanced methodically, a terrifying calm about him. In that moment, Lizzie understood. He might have lost his voice, but he had not lost his nerve. John was a man accustomed to lethal skill when pressed. The man behind the trough fired blindly. splinters flying from the fence around John. Lizzie watched with horrified fascination as John seemed to predict each shot. He ducked low, rolled behind a wagon, and returned fire. Another scream, echoed Randall's friend, had been hit in the leg. Randall was now the only one still on his feet, fury twisting his features. "You can't kill us all," Randall shrieked, half in desperation, half in bravado. Yet John didn't need to kill them all. He advanced, gun raised, expression grim. Randall froze the business end of John's revolver mere inches from his nose. A tense standoff followed. The next move would decide everything. In the hush, Lizzie found her voice. "Let him go," she whispered. If Randall's men died, the Copper Blood gang might come down on them like a swarm of hornets. "Please, let them go." John hesitated, jaw tight. Then, with a silent scowl, he uncocked the hammer and stepped back. He signaled to Randall's men to grab their wounded and leave. Adrenaline still coursed through Lizzie as she watched them stagger away, their horses trailing behind. Randall's gaze was venomous as he mounted up. "This ain't over," he spat, spurring his horse into a gallop. When the dust settled, John replaced his revolver in the holster. Lizzie trembled, her relief battling mounting dread. She ran to him, wanting to check for wounds. He shook his head, apparently unharmed. She noticed the raw tension in his eyes. The fight was over, but a darker war had just begun. That night, the ranch felt more vulnerable than ever. Lizzie paced the small living room, while John leaned against the wall, cleaning and reloading his gun by lantern light. His face was a hardened mask, yet Lizzie could sense the roil of conflicting emotions beneath the surface. "John," she said softly, picking her words with care. "They mentioned a loan. Is it true? Do they have a legal claim to Painted Rock Ranch?" He didn't respond, obviously. Instead, he set aside his gun, took a piece of paper from the kitchen drawer, and began writing in large, clear letters. "After Helena died, I borrowed money. Couldn't keep up the ranch alone. Lost my voice in the same accident that took her life. Randall Avery bought the debt cheap. He wants the land." Lizzie read it, her eyes misting. She finally understood the heartbreak etched into John's spirit. She gently touched his hand. "I'm sorry. I had no idea." She wanted to ask so much more about Helena, about the accident that claimed her. But the mention of Helena's name brought a flicker of pain to his eyes, so she held her tongue. The room fell silent, except for the buzz of a lone mosquito. I can't let you lose this ranch," she said eventually. "You saved my life. I can't just watch them take everything from you." Her voice trembled with determination. John offered a faint, sorrowful smile and signed 3 simple words in the air with his fingers. "It's not your fight." But Lizzie disagreed. Painted Rock Ranch was the only place that had shown her genuine kindness since she lost her family. If Randall Avery and his cronies wanted a war, she couldn't stand idle. She resolved to find a way to help to repay the debt that could cost John his legacy. The next day, Lizzie and John made the journey back to Pine Bluff. The town's dusty main street still bristled with stairs. News of the gunfight had likely traveled fast, and folks parted to let them pass, wariness evident in every glance. Lizzie's heart pounded as they dismounted in front of the bank. Inside, the place smelled of stale cigars and polished wood. A balding clerk named Mr. Tompkins peered at them over round spectacles. When Lizzie explained they wished to inquire about John's loan, Tompkins adjusted his glasses nervously. I'm afraid that note has been sold." "Miss," he said, voice trembling. "As far as the bank is concerned, The rightful owner of the debt is indeed Randall Avery. He's well within his rights to collect or foreclose. Lizzie's anger flared. How can you let that man push people off their land? Tompkins gave a helpless shrug, sweat beading on his brow. It's not personal, miss. Just business. John and Lizzie left the bank with more questions than answers. Their next stop was the sheriff's office, but they found it empty, nothing but a locked door and an old rocking chair. Typical of Pine Bluff, which had no real law to speak of. A wave of hopelessness washed over Lizzie. Then she remembered the name in Wyatt Earp's letter. Come to Dodge City, if you need a friend. She turned to John, who stood by his horse as if waiting for her next move. We might need Wyatt's help. If the Copper Blood Gang is involved, you can't fight them alone. John's jaw tightened. He laid a hand gently on Lizzie's shoulder, as though thanking her for her concern. But was he willing to ask for outside help? His pride might stand in the way. Then he surprised her. With a determined nod, he hoisted himself into the saddle. Lizzie followed suit. Without a word, they rode east on the old stagecoach trail bound for Dodge City and the uncertain promise of allies. The trail to Dodge City was a punishing ride of nearly 200 miles across rugged terrain. Lizzie's muscles ached from the unrelenting hours on horseback. John was patient, halting often to let the horses rest. She was grateful for his silent companionship. They encountered few travelers, only a dusty mail coach rattling by, and a pair of prospectors heading north in search of rumored gold strikes. Each night they made camp beneath vast starlit skies. Lizzie would gather kindling for a small fire, while John quietly scouted the area. The nights carried the howls of distant coyotes and the memory of their last showdown at Painted Rock. Lizzie found it difficult to sleep imagining Randall Avery orchestrating his next move with lethal cunning. More than once, nightmares of the loan sharks and bandits jolted her awake. At dawn on the fourth day, they crested a hill and saw the famed lights of Dodge City flickering in the distance. Even from afar, the town appeared busy trains chugged in and out, carrying passengers, cattle, and fortune seekers. Saloons lined the main street, their signs promising whiskey card games and trouble. A haze of dust and noise enveloped Dodge, a stark contrast to the lonely Wyoming plains. They stabled their horses at a livery near the outskirts. Lizzie wiped her brow, feeling the hum of restless energy that coursed through Dodge City. This was a place where the line between law and lawlessness blurred. If Wyatt Earp was indeed here, she prayed he could offer the help they desperately needed. Finding Wyatt Earp proved easier than anticipated. His reputation as a lawman in Dodge City was second only to his escapades in Tombstone, and the locals directed them to the Long Branch Saloon. As they entered the establishment, Lizzie's eyes roamed the smoky room. Gamblers hunched over green felt tables, painted ladies drifting by with forced smiles, and the sharp tang of liquor in the air. Behind the bar stood a tall, broad-shouldered man, with a thick moustache, Wyatt Earp himself. He was in conversation with a smaller figure who wore a derby hat and coughed into a handkerchief Doc Holliday. They looked up as the newcomers approached. Wyatt's gaze flickered with recognition upon seeing John, and an unspoken camaraderie passed between them. John Stedman, Wyatt said, setting aside a glass. Been a while. Heard you were living like a ghost up in Wyoming. John nodded, tipping his hat. He gestured toward Lizzie in introduction. Wyatt's steely eyes then fell on her. Ma'am, what brings you two to Dodge? Lizzie took a breath. Trouble. A man named Randall Avery is after Painted Rock Ranch. He's working with, maybe even hired by, the Copper Blood Gang. We need help. At the mention of the Copper Blood Gang, Doc Holliday's eyes narrowed. He coughed into his handkerchief, then drawled, "Those devils are rumored to be operating in these parts, too. Stole a payroll from a stagecoach not a fortnight ago." Wyatt leaned on the bar, his voice low, but laced with resolve. "I've tangled with them before, mostly small-timers. But Margaret Dillon is cunning, and she's built quite a following. She'll happily burn a ranch down if it suits her." He paused, looking between John and Lizzie. "Tell me everything." In a quiet corner of the saloon, Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, John Stedman, and Lizzie McNeil hashed out a plan. Wyatt listened carefully as Lizzie recounted the standoff on the ranch, the overdue loan, and Randall Avery's threats. John scribbled details on paper, occasionally glancing at Wyatt to see if he understood. "Randall Avery's in bed with the Copper Blood Gang," Wyatt confirmed. "They're expanding. She's seeking control over land to hide stolen goods, run contraband. Painted Rock Ranch would be perfect for that remote strategic. If they seize the ranch, they'll have a fortress away from prying eyes." Doc Holliday tapped the ash from his cigar. "John, you still a crack shot?" He smirked at the rhetorical question. John raised an eyebrow, as if to say, "Better than you, Doc." Holliday let out a raspy chuckle. "Figured so." Lizzie's voice trembled with worry. "We can't just gun them all down. We need a legal edge. The banknote is their excuse to take the ranch. Even if we fight them off physically, the law might side with them. There has to be a way to clear or repay the debt." Wyatt considered this, stroking his mustache. "One path is to gather enough dirt on Randall Avery to force him to relinquish the note. If we can prove he got it through criminal means, or that the original loan was manipulated, then the bank or a judge might void the claim." Or, Doc Holliday drawled, "We find proof the Copper Blood Gang is behind him. If we turn the gang into the law, maybe Randall loses his muscle. He'd be powerless." Lizzie let out a heavy sigh. "Both are risky, and time is short." Wyatt nodded, rising to his feet. "Then let's get to work. I'll do some digging in Dodge. You two might head back and gather any paperwork John has, anything that could discredit Randall. We'll coordinate from here. If all else fails, we make our stand at Painted Rock." The group dispersed with grim determination. Lizzie felt a surge of hope amid the tension. Wyatt Earp was a man who had stared down worse foes than Randall Swarthworth Avery, and he had not flinched. Maybe, just maybe, Painted Rock Ranch stood a chance. John and Lizzie spent the next day combing through old documents in a cheap rented room above a Dodge City diner. Dusty ledgers and faded bills of sale littered the small table. Lizzie's finger traced the figures, her brow furrowing. "It says here John borrowed $500 after Helena passed, but the bank's records say the debt is almost double that." "How can interest be that high?" John frowned. He wrote a single word on a scrap of paper. "Fraud." "This is suspicious," Lizzie agreed. "But we need more than suspicion to stand up in court. If there's a ledger, an original bank agreement, or even an eyewitness who can confirm the real terms, we might have enough to challenge Randall's claim." Outside the window, the raucous sounds of Dodge City drifted up a stagecoach, rattling by drunken cowboys, shouting at each other the distant whistle of a train. Lizzie suddenly longed for the quiet solitude of Painted Rock Ranch. Danger felt closer here, ironically. The Copper Blood Gang could be lurking in any saloon or alleyway. A brisk knock on the door startled them. Lizzie tensed hand near the small pistol Wyatt had lent her. John lifted his rifle, exchanging a cautious glance with her. Then a muffled voice. "It's me, Wyatt." They let him in. The lawman stepped quickly inside, eyes scanning the scattered documents. "Good news," he said in a low voice. "I've discovered that Randall Avery might be laundering stolen funds from the Copper Blood Gang. A local barkeep, Leonard Price, claims he saw Randall with Margaret Dillon. Price is willing to testify if we can keep him safe." Lizzie's eyes lit up. "That's evidence. If we can prove Avery's in cahoots with outlaws, the bank might have to reconsider the validity of that note." Wyatt nodded. "Exactly. But we'll have to move carefully. If the gang catches wind, we have a witness they'll try to silence Price. I also made contact with an old judge I know in these parts, Judge Thomas Kendall. He might expedite a hearing if we present solid proof of fraud." John wrote. "We should return to Ranch soon." Lizzie read it aloud for Wyatt. She understood John's urgency. Painted Rock was unprotected, and who knew what trouble Randall might be brewing in their absence? Wyatt pulled his hat down with a grim nod. "Doc Holliday and I will keep an eye on Price here. You two secure your homestead. Once I get the judge in line, I'll come to Painted Rock. We'll make a stand, legal or otherwise." The return journey to Wyoming was fraught with nerves. Lizzie constantly glanced over her shoulder, worried that Avery or the Copper Blood Gang might be trailing them. John seemed equally on edge, pushing the horses harder than usual. They traveled mostly at night, stopping only to rest the horses in secluded spots. When the ranch finally appeared on the horizon, Lizzie released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. The sight of the familiar corral and the modest house warmed her despite the lurking danger. Yet something felt off. The door to the barn stood ajar, and the boards had been splintered as if forced open. John dismounted and motioned for Lizzie to stay behind him. He approached the barn, rifle raised. Inside, the place was ransacked. Tools lay strewn about, feed barrels overturned, and one of the Mustangs was missing. Lizzie's heart sank. Someone had come here, likely searching for anything of value or a chance to send a message. She moved to check the house. The door was also busted open, and furniture was thrown about. Papers were scattered on the floor. A sense of violation swept through her. She found no one inside, but it was clear they'd been targeted. In the bedroom, her meager belongings had been tossed aside. Her mother's locket lay on the ground, thankfully not stolen. She clutched it to her chest, tears prickling her eyes. John swept a hand through the mess, his face a mask of silent rage. This is Avery's doing, Lizzie thought. They intended to intimidate and destroy any evidence of wrongdoing. She recalled the original loan document they had left hidden in a trunk. Frantically, she rummaged through the wreckage until she found the trunk under an overturned table. The lock was pried open, and the documents were gone. Defeat and despair weighed on her like an anvil. "We've lost the proof," she breathed. John's expression was grim, but in his eyes Lizzie also read a fierce determination. They might be cornered, but they were not yet beaten. That night, Lizzie barely slept. She tried to clean up the house, sweeping shattered glass and putting overturned furniture back in place. John kept a vigilant watch with his rifle, scanning the empty plains for signs of intruders. Though exhausted, she drifted into a troubled doze, only when dawn broke. She awoke a few hours later to the sound of hoofbeats. Alarmed, she scrambled for her pistol, but John motioned for her to keep low. Peering through a gap in the curtains, she saw a lone rider in the yard, a woman with auburn hair under a black hat. Her attire was dusty but stylish, and 2 revolvers hung at her hips. An unsettling chill crawled over Lizzie's skin. Margaret Dillon, the infamous leader of the Copper Blood Gang. Dillon called out voice, carrying an air of mock courtesy. "John Steadman. You in there? I come bearing a message." John stepped onto the porch, gun at his side. Lizzie hovered nearby, ready to back him up if needed. The woman smiled with cold menace. "I see you've been causing my partner, Mr. Avery, some trouble, and from the looks of it you had visitors while you were gone." "Good." She tilted her head. "We know about Wyatt Earp, too. Don't think that lawman can save you." John stared her down. No words, no fear, just silent defiance. Dylan's grin widened. "I like a man of few words. Let me make this simple. Sell the ranch to Avery for half its worth, or we'll burn it to the ground. You've got 3 days." She turned her horse around, tossing a mocking salute over her shoulder. "Oh, and don't bother running. We'll find you. We always do." With that, she galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust in her wake. Lizzie's hands shook in anger and dread. 3 days, she whispered. "She intends to flush us out or destroy everything." John met her gaze. Though his face was set in grim lines, a spark of determination gleamed in his eyes. One way or another they would make their stand here. Painted Rock was more than just land. It was a memory of Helena, of a life he once cherished, and the only shelter Lizzie had left in this harsh world. The next day, Lizzie and John threw themselves into fortifying Painted Rock Ranch. They barricaded the barn doors with heavy timbers, mended the corral fence, and stockpiled food and water inside the house. Every window was reinforced with planks, leaving slim openings to aim rifles if it came to a firefight. In the midst of these preparations, a lone rider approached. Lizzie tensed until she recognized the lean silhouette and trademark mustache, Wyatt Earp. Relief flooded her. He dismounted, greeting them with a curt nod. Behind him, another figure followed Doc Holliday, pale and coughing, but eyes sharp as ever. Wyatt surveyed the ranch's battered state. "Looks like they did a number on the place." "You two all right?" Lizzie nodded grimly. "We lost important documents." "They stole them." Wyatt's expression darkened. "I've got a testimony from Leonard Price and a judge ready to hear the case next week. But if the gang is on your tail, we might not make it to any courtroom. They're pushing for a showdown." Doc Holliday let out a raspy laugh. "Then a showdown they'll get. I'm too ornery to die quietly anyway." He tipped his hat to Lizzie. "We'll do our best to keep you breathing." That night, the four of them planned their defense. Wyatt believed Randall Avery and Margaret Dillon would come with at least 6 men. They had to be strategic block off easy access routes, set vantage points, and ensure they had enough ammunition. Despite the tension, Lizzie felt oddly comforted. She was no gunslinger, but John Wyatt and Doc Holliday were formidable. Perhaps the coming storm would pass over them if they held strong. The wind howled over the plains, carrying the scent of an approaching storm. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, reflecting the heaviness in Lizzie's heart. She stood on the porch, lantern in hand, scanning the rolling darkness for any sign of movement. Inside, Wyatt Earp polished his revolvers quietly, humming a tune. Doc Holliday dozed fitfully on a cot, occasionally coughing into his handkerchief. John Stedman paced by the window, rifle at the ready. As midnight approached, lightning flashed, illuminating the swaying grasses like specters in a ghostly field. Lizzie swallowed her nerves. They said 3 days right. That's tomorrow. Wyatt adjusted his hat, eyes steady. Men like Randall Avery and Margaret Dillon prefer to strike at dawn or dusk, when fear and fatigue weigh on the mind. We stay vigilant. A stifling hush settled over the house as the night dragged on. Lizzie tried to doze, but each time she closed her eyes, nightmares of flying bullets and blazing barns tore her awake. Eventually she settled near John, who gently squeezed her hand. In his silent way, he offered support, reminding her she wasn't alone. The hours stretched, the storm drew closer, and Lizzie prayed for courage. She reminded herself this ranch is worth fighting for. John gave me a home when I had none. I'll stand beside him no matter how fierce the enemy. Dawn broke in a roiling tempest. Rain hammered the roof. Thunder crashed and lightning forked across the sky. Visibility was poor, but that didn't stop the faint flicker of torches from appearing in the distance. Through the sheets of rain, Lizzie counted 7 riders, maybe 8. Margaret Dillon's silhouette led the pack, Randall Avery at her side. Wyatt stationed himself at a window. Doc Holliday took position behind an overturned table, wiping sweat from his brow and loading his shotgun. John manned another window rifle pointed outward. Lizzie crouched beside him, a pistol in her shaking hands. Stedman Margaret Dillon's voice boomed through the storm, as if the thunder amplified her rage. "You've had your warning. Come out and sign over the deed or we'll make this quick and bloody." John responded with a single shot into the air, a thunderous crack that blended with the storm. Lizzie's heart hammered. The battle had begun. The gang spread out, some riders dismounting to approach on foot. Gunfire erupted. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness, thunder echoing each retort. Wyatt's revolver barked, dropping a figure who'd crept too close. Doc Holliday fired a blast of buckshot, sending another sprawling. Randall Avery shouted commands, trying to organize their assault. Bullets splintered. Wood shattered windows. Rain drenched the battlefield, turning dirt into mud that sucked at the boots of the attackers. Lizzie fired wildly through a gap in the shutters. She couldn't tell if she hit anything, her hands shaking violently. Through the haze she spotted Margaret Dillon astride her horse, taking pot shots with lethal calm. Her face was set in a savage grin. The woman showed no sign of retreat, even as her men fell. Lightning flashed, illuminating the violence in stark clarity. John picked off another assailant trying to circle the house. He moved with remarkable composure, as if each shot was a deliberate choice. The air reeked of gunpowder, wet earth, and fear. Lizzie realized with a jolt that if they were overrun, Painted Rock Ranch would be lost forever. Teeth gritted, she reloaded her pistol, ignoring the stinging in her arms and the raw panic clawing at her stomach. As the firefight raged, it became clear that the attackers weren't relenting. Despite losses, Dillon's crew kept pressing. One of them managed to light a torch, intending to set the barn ablaze. Wyatt shot the man in the arm, sending the torch tumbling into the mud. The house was riddled with bullet holes, and the barricades began to crack under sustained fire. Doc Holliday let out a ragged cough, clutching his side where a bullet had grazed him. Lizzie rushed to help, pressing cloth to the wound. "Hang on, Doc," she murmured. He winked weakly. "No quitting yet, dear." Meanwhile, Dillon and Avery urged their gang onward, the howling wind carrying their orders. "Draw them out!" Avery roared. A hail of bullets peppered the walls. Lizzie's ears rang with each impact. She spotted a group of 3 men creeping around the side, presumably aiming to breach the back door. John gestured furiously, pointing to the back, indicating danger. Lizzie nodded. She grabbed Doc's shotgun, darted through the kitchen, and leveled the barrel at the door. The moment it burst open, she pulled the trigger. The blast knocked one intruder off his feet, and the others scrambled back, retreating into the storm, breath shaking. Lizzie realized they were pinned. Rain hammered the roof in relentless waves, water seeping into the house. Would the storm be their downfall? Or could it work in their favor? A sudden calm descended in the midst of the storm. Gunfire paused as though both sides were reloading or strategizing. The savage drumming of rain filled the silence. Through a shattered window, Lizzie glimpsed Randall Avery, stepping forward, pistol raised. "Stedman, you stubborn fool. You've cost me men and resources. I'll see you hanging for this." He fired a shot that ricocheted off the iron stove. John turned to Wyatt, tapping his watch, then pointing outside. Lizzie realized John had a plan, though it remained wordless. He gestured at Wyatt and motioned for Lizzie to stay low. Then, without warning, John kicked open the front door and sprinted onto the porch, bullets whizzing past. Wyatt followed, covering him with precise revolver fire. John rolled into the mud, coming up behind a broken wagon for cover. He fired steadily, forcing the gang to duck. Avery cursed, diving behind a boulder, while Dylan spun her horse away, returning fire with unnerving accuracy. In the chaos, Lizzie crept around the side, hoping to flank the attackers. Her clothes were soaked hair plastered to her face. Heart thundering, she edged closer to where she last saw Randall Avery. Lightning revealed him crouched behind a fallen log, reloading. She leveled her pistol hands, trembling. Could she do it? Could she shoot a man in cold blood? Before she could decide, Avery spotted her. He raised his gun, fury blazing in his eyes. A shot rang out, but it wasn't hers. A sharp crack from the side. Wyatt Earp's bullet caught Randall Avery in the shoulder, causing him to drop his weapon with a cry. Lizzie gasped, stumbling back, nearly losing her balance in the slick mud. Avery clutched his wound face, contorted in pain and rage. He glared at Wyatt, who advanced with the same unwavering determination he'd shown in countless legends. Randall Avery. Wyatt said, voice hard. "You're under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy with the Copper Blood Gang." Avery spat at the ground, refusing to concede. Before Wyatt could subdue him, Margaret Dillon galloped up, gun blazing. Wyatt dove for cover, returning fire. Dillon's shot clipped the brim of Wyatt's hat, a near miss. Sparks erupted as bullets struck rocks and wagon remnants. Seizing the moment, Avery scrambled away, ignoring the blood streaming down his arm. Lizzie scrambled to reload her pistol, but fumbled with the wet bullets. Dillon whirled her horse around, eyes burning with homicidal fury. She locked onto Lizzie, spurring the animal forward. Everything blurred for Lizzie. The hooves thundered. Dillon raised her revolver. Lizzie stood rooted in place, her mind screaming to move. A flash of lightning split the sky, followed by a single gunshot from behind her. Dillon jerked her shot going wide, then toppled from the horse. Lizzie spun to see John Stedman, rifle still smoking, standing in the rain like a silent sentinel. He had fired the shot that took down Margaret Dillon. The notorious gang leader lay sprawled in the mud, her chest heaving. Lightning crackled again, revealing the stunned disbelief in her eyes. With Dillon fallen, the remaining outlaws lost their nerve. Those still capable of fleeing did so, vanishing into the downpour. Randall Avery staggered into the distance, but Wyatt Earp followed, revolver drawn. A brief scuffle ensued. Lizzie heard a pained yelp, then Wyatt returned, dragging Avery by the collar. Inside the battered farmhouse, the survivors gathered. The storm raged on, but Painted Rock Ranch still stood. Dillon was disarmed and lay propped against a wall, wounded but alive. Avery was bound, bleeding from his shoulder, spewing curses at John, Lizzie, and Wyatt. Doc Holliday, though wounded, managed a sarcastic grin. Well, that was invigorating. Lizzie's entire body shook as the adrenaline dissipated. She looked at John, who gently touched her arm, as if to ask if she was all right. She nodded, though tears threatened to spill. She'd never fired a gun at another human until that morning, never seen so much blood. Yet relief mingled with horror at the violence that had descended on Painted Rock. Wyatt Earp's face was grim. "We'll take Avery and Dillon to stand trial. I have enough witnesses in Dodge City, plus Leonard Price's testimony, to tie them to the Copper Blood gang. We'll see how their claim to the ranch holds up behind bars." John nodded, the tension in his posture slowly unraveling. The ranch was saved for now, but the memories of bullets slicing through rain-soaked air would cling to Lizzie, a reminder of the savage cost of survival on the frontier. In the quiet days after the siege, Lizzie and John focused on recovery. The ranch bore heavy scars, shattered windows, torn fences, but together they rebuilt. Wyatt Earp escorted Margaret Dillon and Randall Avery to Dodge City, where they faced charges for conspiracy and attempted murder. With their threats removed, a fragile peace settled over Painted Rock. Doc Holliday, wounded but still sharp-tongued, offered Lizzie a rare compliment before departing. "You've got grit." His words lingered with her. That evening, Lizzie and John stood watching the sun dip behind the plains. The ranch, though battered, had endured. Lizzie turned to John with quiet gratitude, unsure how to express all she felt. He reached for his notepad and wrote, "You are family now." Tears welled in Lizzie's eyes. For the first time in years, she felt anchored, no longer a wandering soul, but someone who had found home, healing, and a future worth fighting for. In the days after the siege, Lizzie and John quietly rebuilt Painted Rock Ranch. Bullet holes were patched, fences repaired, and the rhythm of chores became a balm for their wounds. One afternoon, Lizzie discovered a box in the barn loft containing Helena's wedding dress and a bundle of old letters. She brought them to John, who accepted them with a heavy, wordless gaze. They sat together, reading Helena's tender words, letters filled with dreams of family, of love, rooted deep in this land. Later, John handed Lizzie Helena's diary. Alone that night, Lizzie read page after page, learning the depth of Helena's devotion and the meaning behind John's fierce loyalty to the ranch. They were both haunted by loss, but in each other they found quiet understanding. As they worked Yanpon by side to restore the ranch, it became more than a refuge from the past. It became a shared hope for the future. A month after the siege, justice finally arrived at Painted Rock Ranch. Wyatt Earp returned with legal documents bearing Judge Kendall's seal, an official verdict that nullified Randall Avery's fraudulent claim, restoring full ownership of the ranch to John Stedman. The testimony tying Avery to the Copper Blood gang and the evidence of inflated interest rates sealed the ruling. Lizzie was overwhelmed with gratitude, her mind flashing back to the starving barefoot girl who had once stumbled onto this land with nothing but a threadbare sack. Now, thanks to John's silent mercy and Wyatt's unwavering resolve, the nightmare was over. Life gradually returned to a gentler rhythm. Lizzie worked tirelessly beside John, tending to the land, planting seeds in the revived garden, and offering water and shelter to wandering travelers. Word spread that Painted Rock Ranch had become a haven in the unforgiving Wyoming wilderness. Lizzie and John did not need words. Their bond grew in quiet glances and simple gestures. A new wooden hairbrush he carved for her, a sturdy pair of boots he gifted without explanation. One evening, they stood at the corral, watching the sun cast fire across the plains. John handed Lizzie a slip of paper that read, "Thank you for staying." Her eyes filled with tears. "This is where I belong," she whispered. From that moment on, they faced the future side by side. Years passed, and the ranch's legend only grew. Some claimed a silent man roamed the range, guarding the land with supernatural precision. Others told of a kind woman who welcomed all with open arms and warm meals. But the truth was even more powerful. Painted Rock Ranch became a sanctuary where broken souls found a second chance. John never regained his voice, but he taught the language of trust to young ranch hands while Lizzie became a pillar of compassion in the region. Helena's orchard bloomed again. Children's laughter rang through the yard, and the house that had once echoed with silence now brimmed with life. The ghosts of the past were still present, but they no longer haunted the place. Instead, they reminded everyone who came through that love could grow from sorrow and family could be found where least expected. Painted Rock stood not as a monument to tragedy, but as a living testament to mercy grit and the quiet strength of two souls who refused to give up. And so our harrowing tale of struggle and salvation draws to a close. Lizzie found a place to call home in the most unexpected corner of the frontier, and John Stedman's silent compassion changed a life that had almost given up hope. Their bond, forged amid hardship and gunfire, blossomed into a thriving haven called Painted Rock Ranch, a living testament that the greatest treasures of the Wild West aren't nuggets of gold, but acts of kindness and a spirit that refuses to yield. If you found inspiration in Lizzie and John's journey, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support keeps these stories alive and shining. Don't hesitate to leave a comment with your thoughts or tales of resilience you've encountered in your life. Together, let's keep the legacy of hope and courage blazing across the frontier and beyond.